Hello and good day, everyone. You are tuning in to the Undeniable Podcast, an ambitious foray into the exciting, yet not often enough explored world of excellence in the Virgin Islands. I am Shea Alexander, the host of this series of exciting conversations, and I am the founder and principal consultant of OAC Group, a multidisciplinary consulting firm offering strategic growth and business development solutions. Undeniable has been curated for those keen to learn from individuals at the height of their career. Together, we'll enjoy frank discourse and unpack what it means and takes to be great undeniably. Undeniable leans on OAC Group's extensive network of clients, partners, and friends to feature an impressive roster of industry leaders and brilliant minds in riveting, unscripted conversations monthly. So, as you may or may not know, because of course I am not always the most consistent promoter, this is technically episode 3, but we are on our second conversation, which features somebody I am very, very excited to. Well, I don't want to say I'm excited to speak to her because that would suggest I don't speak to her almost every week, but I'm very excited to speak to her as a guest of my podcast, and that is Dr. Sauda Smith. She's a name I don't believe anybody will be unfamiliar with, but just as I did with my last guest, Dr. Rubin, I want to go ahead and give Dr. Smith the opportunity to introduce herself. And then where she may be a little too humble, I will throw in some important characteristics, traits, and defining features that I think will lend to our conversation today. So Dr. Smith, thank you so much for joining me. And go ahead and tell us a little bit about yourself.
Good morning, Shay. Thank you so much for having me on your podcast, as you said. We're not strangers to each other. We converse often, but it's nice to be able to take it to a different place, to talk about different things, and hopefully inspire each other some more during this conversation. I think most people know that I'm a career educator who has now segued into looking at education from a philanthropic lens. So with that, I'm ready for us to have our chat.
Mm-hmm. So, Dr. Smith, I think, like you said, I think everybody knows you as Dr. Smith, the educator. I actually first met you, and this is something that I just take great pride in. I think it speaks to your ability because as much as I did well academically, I was notoriously horrible at history. So, Dr. Brooks at the college, I think he was the first person who ever had to give me anything less than an A. Because I just did not have a brain for dates and remembering exactly what happened and what was this name, particularly when the name is not even, the sort of name we're familiar with now in the first place. But one of my first major introductions to you was when you taught me, I think it was called Introduction to African History, was it called that? Or African Civilization?
African Civilization.
And that class was, I think for me as a young Black man, that class was transformative because I had not yet understood or even just had a general awareness of what African civilization had accomplished. So I was, I think, just like many other young Black people, operating on this incorrect assumption that Blackness carried with it a requirement to do new things, when in fact, Blackness has had a history of success and a history of pioneering success in many instances. Were you the only person that taught this course at the college?
Oh no, the course was also taught by Dr. Catherine Smith,
Mm-hmm.
who's the Director of Culture now, as well as now the class is being taught by Enya Douglas, who was actually a student of mine, as well as Dr. Catherine Smith. So
That's
nice to
good.
pass the torch in that way.
Yeah. So the African civilization course, I think for anybody that knows you, you are definitely someone who really, really focuses in on making sure that we understand our history and our future as people of the African diaspora. Why do you think that course is as important as it is, at least for persons like myself? And do you recommend it for people who may not have taken it?
Well, I always recommend anything that makes us look critically at the world.
Mm-hmm.
And there is no question that Africa is the cradle of civilization.
Mm-hmm.
I often ask the question, people say, well, it's the Middle East. I often ask the question, Is the Middle East a continent?
Mm-hmm.
You know, is it a country?
Mm-hmm.
Middle of what, east of where?
Mm-hmm.
Right? The cradle of civilization is in Egypt.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and we as, you know, people of the African diaspora need to understand that.
Mm-hmm.
We need to understand Greco-Roman influences and borrow and lend from Africa.
Mm-hmm.
We just need to understand the world, not giving any preference to any particular group,
Mm-hmm.
but we need to understand the world
Yeah.
that we live in.
Now, I know that that may feel to my listeners like a bit of a strange tangent because obviously we did advertise this episode in a particular way, but I wanted to start with a conversation and a brief conversation around that cause because I think for me, in attempting this podcast, one of the key goals is making my listeners, particularly my young Caribbean listeners, aware of their potential. And I think it is easier to understand potential when you understand where you have come from. So as we celebrate festival right now, I think even understanding BVI culture as being something much richer, much more diverse, much more robust than I think a lot of us may have thought of it in the past, I think it gets us to a place where we're much more able to say, I come from greatness and I want to move towards even more greatness. So for me, that course, and particularly your teaching style, was an awakening of the idea that there's a limitless beyond for you as a student. And I give credit to people like yourself, also one of my teachers, also another English teacher, Miss Juliet Evelyn, who taught me in high school, because educators like you guys, to me, embrace an idea of the student exceeding beyond the classroom.
Oh, absolutely, because my philosophy is that I'm there to facilitate the process.
Mm-hmm.
You've learned everything that you need to know to be successful in kindergarten.
Mm-hmm.
You've learned your numbers and you've learned your letters
Mm-hmm.
and you've learned your sounds.
Mm-hmm.
So once you can read and count and think,
Mm-hmm.
then we begin to facilitate the process of finding out what you are great at.
Mm-hmm.
And there's always a transference of what you're going to do well.
Yeah. So we're talking right now about education, which allows me to pivot into what is going to be the defining impetus or the main impetus for today's conversation. With Undeniable, what I aim to do is begin at the point of recent excellence or recent success or recent milestone, and then walk backwards into distilling what for you as a person who has managed this success is your philosophy or framework. So recently, Unite BVI celebrates, well, not recently, I guess we're on the cusp of it right now. Unite BVI, partnering with the Ministry of Education, celebrates just about 12 months of the MoU to redefine education. Talk to us about what that was.
That's probably one of the most exciting things that I've done ever, because it gives me an opportunity to look at education from a different vantage point. The partnership with the government of the Virgin Islands through the Ministry of Education allows us a framework for that engagement. It allows us to manage expectations about what each partner's responsibility will be in this process. I think it's no secret that we promised 5 playgrounds because playgrounds are part of the socialization process in education. You learn more in the playground sometimes than you learn in the classroom. You learn kindness, you learn grace, you learn tolerance, you learn patience. So when we embarked on this reimagining education, it wasn't just about infrastructure or even curriculum, but what else can we bring to this picture to change this paradigm of education that we have?
Yeah, so I think you saw me chomping at the bit just now to say something, but I wanted to let you finish. And thank you for explaining that to us. And we'll go into it a bit further. But I had the privilege of attending 1 or 2 of the handover ceremonies for the playgrounds. And there was something that you said. I mean, I always like the way that you speak. You're very articulate, and there's a very emotive quality to the way that you speak. A very deliberate sort of weaving of feelings into how you speak. But there was something that you said that I just really liked, which was, I mean, amongst the other lessons that you just mentioned, learning on the playground, you also mentioned it teaches you how to win and how to lose with grace. And I think that is really such a beautiful lesson in success, because success is often considered to be success, so the doing well at the thing, the successful attempt, the attempt that goes through, the attempt that reaps rewards. But success carries with it an inherent tie to failure.
Oh, indubitably.
Mm-hmm.
Indubitably. And if you, any successful person that you've seen has lost
Mm-hmm.
and has been robbed,
Mm-hmm.
because it's no secret we're in the Olympics, and there are a lot of individuals who feel that they should have been treated better, or if X had been in place,
Mm-hmm.
then they would have won. You always have that. So you're not going to be successful without having lost,
Mm-hmm.
not having achieved the things that you might have wanted to achieve in that particular instance.
Mm-hmm.
And then there will be sometimes when you're out and out robbed.
Yeah.
But how you deal with that,
Mm-hmm.
how that affects you as a person, how that impacts your loved ones,
Mm-hmm.
becomes very important,
Mhm.
because it will determine what the opportunities you have moving forward look like in certain instances, and how you deal with yourself.
Grace, I think, is the word there. Having the grace to take the win or the loss and take it well, and to learn from it. And of course, as an educator, you can always speak about the persistence of learning or the perpetuity of learning. But let's walk our way back to the MoU. So, what was the genesis of it? Because I think most of us now in the community are starting to see the first fruits of you guys' labor. But we can appreciate that the magnitude of what you're doing now could not have started a month ago, or 2 months ago, even 3 months ago. What was the genesis of this Memorandum of Understanding?
Well, I think it must be 2022. The ministry gave us a call and asked if Unite BVI would be willing to help them with some structural analysis that had to happen at the schools.
Mm-hmm.
Went to my board, and the board said, yes, we'd be willing to do that. As those approvals were coming through to engage in that, it became urgent that a structural assessment about the escalate happen immediately, because there were elements of the school that weren't doing well, some elements of the roof not being safe and crumbling. So when that structural assessment was conducted,
Mm-hmm.
it was determined that the students had to be moved from the building immediately. And if you're a parent, an educator, an educational administrator, a member of the ministry, the minister, you know how that makes your heart flutter.
Mm-hmm.
How are we going to get these kids out of school? Where are they going to go? What are we going to do? So at that particular instance, we began to brainstorm with the ministry of where we would redeploy, these students.
Mm-hmm.
And we determined that we could outfit the second floor of Enos Adams, that the Haycraft so generously donated to the country.
Mm-hmm.
We could outfit that second floor, and we could refurbish a building at Francis Letson Primary School, and ultimately split the children in half, while we again would put our minds together what we would do moving forward. This was the immediate solution to a very immediate problem, to refurbish these two spaces.
Mm-hmm.
As that began to come to fruition, and look at the success that was garnered from those two activities, you think to yourself, how do we keep this going? How do we make this bigger? How do we, in essence, provide assistance to government to change things, you know, to envision change. And I'd like to say here that the philanthropic spirit in the BVI has always been here. This is just another lens through which we view it.
Yeah.
My mother-in-law always used to regale me with stories of how BVI lenders would help each other build their homes, how BVI lenders would look after each other's children, and family members would raise other family members' children. So the philanthropic spirit, or that which we do to make the lives of someone else better, has always been alive and well in the territory. This is another lens, this is a different process, but this isn't anything new.
I think you've also managed Unite BVI in collaboration with the Ministry of Education and your other partners and donors and facilitators of this. You've not only managed to take philanthropy through a new lens, but I think you've managed to take it to a new level. Because, and I'm not a legal mind, and I don't think you are either, so I will leave this to any attorneys who might tune in to correct me if I'm wrong. But when I was just trying to understand what a Memorandum of Understanding is, it seems to be a sort of document that is not precisely legal in terms of its binding nature, but it speaks to the expectations that the parties involved have of each other. And so what it aims to do is to define them in a manner where everybody's able to take point at various stages and say, this is what I expect Shay to do right now. This is what I expect Sauda to do right now. Am I correct in my understanding of it?
I'm going to use my favorite word here,
Indubitably.
Indubitably.
Yeah.
I mean, that is spot on what is happening here. And there were a lot of people, a lot of work. This was a year process, you know, for us to get to a stage where the Attorney General's recommendations had to be considered. Our private attorney's recommendations had to be considered. What the students need, what would we do to enable and activate parental involvement in this process. So there were a gargantuan number of stakeholders in this project. And to them, we're all very grateful because they allow us to see things in a way that you might not particularly see from the vantage point where you are presently.
Yeah. So I've managed to be kind of in the orbit of Unite BVI a bit because, and we spoke about in my last episode of the podcast, the Mindful Campaign, which is another one of the things that Unite BVI has been a part of. So I've had some proximity to you guys, and I've really been able to observe significant growth in a short space of time. And it seems to be growth in every dimension. So growth in terms of scope. So even as you were speaking about the MoU, you spoke about its genesis as trying to find a temporary solution, but I think being ambitious enough and having the foresight to say, hey, let us actually try to identify the resources to make this a long-term win. What is the mindset that you have, or what is the toolkit in your head that allows you and your partners to go from let's work on this temporary fix to let's do this in a much bigger way? Because oftentimes that transition of scale and scope can be very daunting. Growth can be very scary.
Oh, indeed. Indeed. But I think the ability to listen, you know, Unite BVI, I love to say that we do not do philanthropy to people. We do it with people. So with growth, particularly in your scope, you might need to augment the individuals who become part of your stakeholder group. You know, and by that I mean the stakeholder for curriculum, to help you with curriculum development, should not be expected to help you with capital bills because that's not their area of expertise.
Yeah.
So you have to respect someone's area of expertise and ask them to partner with you toward this specific goal. Because just because someone's interest might be the window size of a particular building, while my interest might be when we look at curriculum, let's make sure that the language arts curriculum is superior. You can marry, there's a real synergy that happens between those goals because the overarching goal is to improve the educational system.
Mm-hmm. So you would credit an organization's ability to scale to its ability to listen and its ability to kind of pick, augment, and sort of mainline into your systems and structures the correct talent and the correct expertise.
And the correct advisors,
Okay.
right? Or stakeholders, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
Because listening to people is critical.
Mm-hmm.
You know, when you go to the doctor,
Mm-hmm.
you know, an exceptional doctor asks a lot of questions.
Yes.
And then begins to look at how they can determine where you need help,
Mm-hmm.
right? If you're not asking questions and listening to those answers, then you can't actually help people.
Mm-hmm.
If, you know, you go into your auntie's house
Mm-hmm.
and your auntie still has those plastic covers on the furniture,
Yeah.
you don't take your auntie's plastic covers off her furniture. You say to her, auntie, my Lord, those plastic covers are really hot in the summertime.
Mm-hmm.
And you know, they don't actually protect from dust
Mm-hmm.
the way you might think.
Mm-hmm.
They actually fade the color, the beautiful color of the upholstery. Let's take one of these off and see how it looks and see how you feel, and let's see how we do this.
Mm-hmm.
You know, so the same respect that you would show to your auntie because you're trying to help her
Mm-hmm.
is the same respect you show to everyone that you're attempting to help.
What stands out for me with your metaphor just now is, and I imagine that this comes back to your ability to listen, because listening is what affords you an understanding of the goals and motivations and concerns, fears, and agendas of the other people involved in the process. What stands out is that you identified her concerns being keeping it from getting dusty, and you also identified that more deeper than keeping it from getting dusty is her need to keep her furniture in good order. So then you said to her, not only does the plastic cover not actually keep it from getting dusty, but it fades the color. So I think that was such a great metaphor, and I know that must just be at the top of your head, but it's such a beautiful metaphor because it really speaks to one of the things, even as a consultant, I often have come to understand. You have to know the motivating agenda, I like to say. And I know agenda is like a loaded word. There's a villainous kind of intent to it, but really we all have agendas. We wake up every day and we have a plan for the day. And this plan for the day feeds into a wider plan for the week, which feeds into a wider plan for the month, and we go macro. Essentially, we have an idea of what we want to do with our lives and with our time. And I think there's an arrogance or a lack of empathy in deciding party B has a wrong agenda and I have the right one. And so we take a hammer-headed approach of, I am going to tell you what has to happen. But that does not encourage my participation. That does not encourage my partnership. And then that just causes a conflict, and the conflict escalates until even if you manage to achieve the goal, you have not done it in the most efficient way. It's taken more time, more energy, and I think most frighteningly, more bad feelings to get it done. But in listening to you, it is very apparent that literally from the first thing we spoke about in this conversation to now, a key thing for you is collaboration. What have you learned about collaboration that guides you to think like this? Because you clearly think in a very multi-party, multi-dimension way. You think about the players. How did you learn that?
I like games.
Okay.
I'm a real game player.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and in games, you have to kind of be able to anticipate certain actions,
Mm-hmm.
right? good and bad.
Mm-hmm.
I like games, and I read all the time. I read everything from a comic book to a linguistic history of a West African language. I mean, I'm a reader.
Mm-hmm.
So when you read, you spend a lot of time being quiet.
Mm-hmm.
I love to listen to audiobooks, so I've already worked on the listening piece, because you have to listen when you're listening to a book, otherwise you're gonna miss something.
Yeah.
So I think that in the game playing, the watching, the observing, the waiting to see what happens, and the listening and thinking about what you've heard. I don't know, this is an interesting question. I'm just trying to really figure out, like how I think about, things the way that I do. I think
sometimes the very beautiful thing about magic is that it's not always understood, but it's felt. So you may not know what it is that you're doing, but because just listening to you speak again, it's very evident from every response of yours that you take of, and this is why in the promotion of this, I coined the episode, Dr. Sauda Smith on the MoU to Reimagine Education, collaboration, and well, I actually can't remember what the last one was, but collaboration was a word I had to put in there. Collaborative philanthropy and purpose. Because it is very clear to me every time I speak to you that you have a really fundamental understanding of who the people in the room are. So a bit of a disclaimer here, that's no secret anyway. You and I also serve on a board together. And what I have picked up on as one of your superpowers is after I go off on the deep end and become a radical about something or the other, you then have a really good way of making the same point as me, but in a way where everybody in the room says, yes, I think that makes a lot of sense.
Sorry to tell you this, but that's the beauty of age.
Mm-hmm.
That's the beauty of age.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, when I was your age, I would get hot quick.
Yeah.
I mean, fire.
Yeah.
Immediately.
Mm-hmm.
And you eventually learn that my mother always used to say to me, God bless her soul, she used to say, you get more flies with honey than you do with vinegar.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not saying that there's not a need for vinegar sometimes, but as a rule, you just try to be like honey, be smooth, be still, be sweet.
It's like you say, level heads prevail.
Yeah. Cool.
So let's come back to, I think, the final and probably the most critical question on the MoU before we start to talk more about some of the other themes for today's conversation. We have seen it already be extremely transformative in nature. So like you spoke about, it has gone beyond just infrastructure, but I don't think it's bad to say for a lot of us, clearly the most impressive thing is we are seeing concrete. We are seeing buildings erected, we are seeing things happening. We saw playgrounds, we saw schools being rebuilt, or the plans being laid out for schools to be rebuilt. And then I think we also saw, when you guys announced at Maria's, you spoke about, I think you have an effort to train some teachers in place as well?
Yes.
So as you said, this is not solely infrastructural. You really are reimagining education here in the British Virgin Islands, and in a way that goes beyond just recouping pre-armor, but I think going well beyond that, just like we said in the classroom, given the resources to exceed expectation and to go into the future and do well in it. But what can we expect? And I know not all of it is available for dissemination right now, but just as you can, what can we expect as we conclude? We're concluding year one, so moving into year two. Well, actually, first question, do you want to probably just, for those that may not have caught every bit of it, because it has been a lot, what have been the deliverables for year one?
Well, the 5 playgrounds at 5 different schools. Those schools being Francis Letson, Willard Wheatley, Ebenezer Thomas, Joyce Samuel, Eunice Adams.
Okay.
And that was that was a joy. But some of the work that people might not be seeing is we entered into partnership with the Ministry of Islamic Staff Community College to train the teachers as part of the new hires program.
Okay.
And the reason that becomes necessary is you might have been a grade A sociology student at university. Well, you never took classes in pedagogy. Pedagogy is teaching, right? How do I then teach sociology? How do I teach mathematics? How do I teach? So you have a lot of people with degrees in what we call content areas, but they don't have the pedagogical skills to confer that knowledge
to
on
someone
else.
Yeah.
So we worked with the ministry, University of Virgin Islands, and HLSCC. I'm already calling HLSCC a university. I hope the president of the college is hearing me. We worked so that we could get those new teachers as well as some teachers in the system upgraded skills in pedagogy, in teaching. One really exciting, I was really excited with the ministry's desire and absolute commitment to robotics. And with the robotics camp for the students over the summer, them taking a team to Singapore last year, having a real competition, a real engaging activity to choose the students who would go to compete in Greece at next year's first global robotics competition. The partnership that we now have with St. Kitts and Nevis Robotics, as well as the OECS, looking at what is being done and really providing a lot of support in particular areas that people will need to look at their curriculum and determine what changes need to be made to incorporate STEAM, but most importantly robotics at this particular juncture into the curriculum. So those are a lot of the things that we've done. We've had ongoing structural assessments at the schools because the schools suffered way more damage during the hurricanes than people even know. There's a lot of times you can't see what's going on until you crack open that wall. So we've had, we participated in a number of activities where we've engaged companies to do the structural assessments at each school. So what you're going to see in year 2 is you're going to see a continued commitment to providing educational resources for schools, smart boards, other types of labs and things to get students accustomed to the technological world that we live in from early. You're going to see a continued commitment to training and educating teachers, and you're going to see some solid infrastructural things happen, begin, and others continue.
So, Dr. Smith, I think we have reached at just about the half mark here, and I do have quite a bit more content and quite a bit more questions. You got really excited just now talking about the successes of the MoU in year 1, and I do have some questions for you around the years to follow. But I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to stop us here. I do hope that our listeners thus far have really been able to learn about the MoU, but also about really the way that Unite BVI works and the way that you think to drive a machine like that in collaboration with the various team members, donors, and partners that you guys have. I really encourage you guys to tune into part 2 of this conversation because I really am just thoroughly impressed, as I think you can hear in my voice, with Dr. Smith's approach to philanthropy, but just generally teamwork and partnership. So join us for part 2 of this conversation. I think it's going to really